She needed money to save her mother. He needed a fake bride to keep his inheritance. They never expected that one night of weakness would result in 3 babies. She finds herself torn between the lie and the love that begins to emerge. When the truth comes to light, a surprising gesture changes everything. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Diana pressed her back against the cold, tiled wall of the hospital corridor, desperately clutching a small stack of overdue bills. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, an anxious drumbeat that refused to let her rest. Nurses bustled past, shoes squeaking on the polished floor, while the low hum of fluorescent lights amplified every moment of her anxiety. She kept hearing the same stern voices in her head. "Your mother needs this procedure soon. Without immediate payment, we can't continue." The medical staff had been compassionate enough, but they still needed money, and she had none. A couple of feet away, 2 doctors spoke in hushed tones, glancing at Diana as if they knew the weight she carried. One of them caught her eye and quickly looked away, unwilling to add another layer of pity. Diana exhaled slowly, forcing herself to move, to keep searching for any possible way out of this impossible situation. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, startling her. Pulling it out, she noticed a missed call from a number she didn't recognize. Probably another collections agency, she thought bitterly. But as she was about to slip the phone back, it buzzed again, the same unknown number lighting up the screen. Part of her wanted to ignore it. The last thing she needed was more bad news. But something nudged her to answer. "Hello?" she said, voice shaky. A measured, polite tone came through. "Miss Diana? I'm calling on behalf of Zachary Lockhart. There's an opportunity he'd like to discuss with you. Please, can we arrange a meeting?" Her brow furrowed. The name sounded faintly familiar, but she couldn't place it. "I'm sorry, who?" "Mr. Lockhart would prefer to explain in person. He believes he can offer a solution to your, shall we say, difficulties." Before she could respond, the call ended, leaving only the sterile, beeping sounds of the hospital. Standing there, confused, she felt a strange blend of hope and dread. Who was this person? And how did he know about her problems? The question haunted her all the way back to her mother's room. She quietly pushed open the door. Her mother lay motionless except for the slow rise and fall of her chest. The rhythmic beeping of the machines connected to her created a steady soundtrack of fragile life. Diana sat in the bedside chair and stroked her mother's hand, remembering the times they had laughed together in the tiny kitchen of their apartment, how her mother's bright smile used to make all hardships seem smaller. The memory brought a tightness to Diana's throat. She couldn't lose her mother, not if there was any chance of saving her. The next day, as she was stepping out of the elevator on her way to the hospital pharmacy, a sharply dressed woman approached, holding out a shimmering gold business card. "Diana? I'm Mr. Lockhart's assistant," the woman said evenly. "He invites you to dinner tonight at the Sienna Lounge. Please don't be late." With that, she offered a polite nod and walked away before Diana could ask for details. All day, Diana wrestled with her thoughts. The hospital corridors blurred into a single anxious swirl. She kept staring at the business card, its gold lettering reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. A part of her wanted to throw it away. No so-called opportunity came without a catch. But every time she thought of her mother, the mounting bills, and the hopelessness gnawing at her, she realized she had no choice. If this meeting could help, she had to go. That evening, she arrived at the Sienna Lounge, feeling completely out of place. The restaurant glowed with soft amber lighting, and the quiet hum of conversation mixed with the faint clink of wine glasses. Waiters in crisp uniforms floated between the tables, offering discreet bows. Diana inhaled, wishing she'd had time to change into something more polished. Her scuffed shoes and worn purse betrayed her financial reality. At a secluded corner table sat Zachary Lockhart. Tall, composed, and undeniably magnetic, he rose to greet her, gesturing for her to sit. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice resonating with a controlled calm. His hair was neatly styled and a tailored suit clung to his broad shoulders. He looked like someone who'd never had to worry about overdue bills or shutting off the electricity. Diana took a seat, hands trembling slightly beneath the table. "I'm not really sure why I'm here," she ventured, her gaze flicking anxiously to the cutlery she was afraid to use. Zachary steepled his fingers, observing her with a critical but not unkind eye. "I understand your mother is in the hospital, and time is pressing." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "My grandmother has set certain conditions on my inheritance. One of those conditions involves me settling down, demonstrating I can uphold family values." He hesitated, as if choosing each word carefully. "I need a fiancé, at least for a while." The words stunned Diana. She felt them reverberate through her, colliding with the looming hospital bills in her mind. "You need a fiancé? But you don't even know me." "I know enough," Zachary replied briskly. "My assistant has looked into your situation, your mother's care, the mounting debt, and your impeccable record of paying everything you can, never resorting to anything unethical. You're desperate, but you still have integrity." Her heart hammered, half insulted and half tempted. She forced herself to ask, "What are you offering exactly?" His eyes flicked to the gold-edged folder resting on the table. "A solution. I will cover your mother's medical expenses fully. In return, you will accompany me to certain family events, wear my ring, appear by my side for a set amount of time. We'll make it all look real." She swallowed, torn between disbelief and rising hope. "People will know it's fake. Eventually," she murmured. Zachary leaned forward. "They won't, if you play your part correctly. But if they find out, I stand to lose everything, and so will you." An uneasy silence stretched between them. Then the waiter approached, discreetly placing 2 glasses of water before slipping away. Diana let her fingers drift around the rim of the glass, eyes drawn to the bead of condensation sliding down. She hated the thought of faking love, of standing beside a stranger and pretending to be happy. But the image of her mother, frail and pale against hospital sheets, cut through her doubts. "How much?" she asked quietly, the question feeling like a permanent stain on her pride. Zachary slid the folder across the table. "Enough to ensure your mother gets the best care, and enough to help you clear your debts and perhaps rebuild your life." He opened it to a page at the back. The sum written there made her lungs seize. It was more money than she could ever have imagined. Her mind spun with shame and longing. Was she really about to agree to this? Zachary watched her closely. "I'm not doing this lightly," he said, his voice almost gentle. "I know it's complicated, but the choice is yours." She realized she couldn't walk away, not if she wanted to save her mother. Summoning her last shred of courage, she gripped the pen. "For my mother," she whispered, and signed her name. With a final flourish, the deal was done. They didn't linger. The moment the ink dried, Zachary rose, placed a crisp check into her trembling hands, and offered a curt farewell. In a daze, Diana tucked the check into her bag and headed straight to the hospital. Relief flooded the receptionist's face when Diana handed over parental payment for her mother's treatment, enough to keep everything afloat, for now. As the night wore on, she stayed by her mother's bedside, wondering if she'd made a deal with the devil or found an unlikely savior. By the time she left the hospital, the moon had shifted high in the sky. The taxi ride back to her cramped apartment felt dreamlike. Once home, she sat on the small couch, staring at the contract. She wanted to call someone, so she picked up her phone and dialed her best friend's number. "Hey," her friend answered, voice already weighted with concern. "Are you okay? I've been worried." Diana hesitated, struggling to explain this impossible arrangement. Finally, she told her friend everything. "I did it for Mom," she repeated, half comforting herself, half seeking validation. On the other end came a long silence. Then her friend sighed. "Be careful, Diana. This can't be easy. Don't forget who you are in all this." They ended the call, neither quite sure what the future held. She closed her eyes, recalling how Zachary had spoken of his inheritance and family obligations as if they were a heavy burden. A billionaire with a fortress of secrets, and now she was stepping inside those walls. Standing outside her apartment building in the faint glow of a street lamp, she pulled the contract from her bag. Under the dim light, her name shimmered in black ink alongside Zachary's signature. The check that could save her mother was tucked inside a separate envelope, a silent testament to how quickly her life had changed. She could almost sense the delicate line she had crossed, no longer just a daughter fighting for her mother's health, but now the fiancé of a man she barely knew. Her stomach churned with uncertainty, but there was also a trace of fragile hope. Maybe everything would work out. Maybe this was exactly the miracle she needed. Steeling herself, she folded the contract and slipped it back into her bag, ready to step forward, despite the fear dancing at the edge of her thoughts. She gazed up at the waning moon, inhaled the cool night air, and allowed one final doubt to pass over her. Then she whispered a promise to do whatever it took. But the future stretched ahead, dark and unknown, like the sky without stars. Diana looked at the signed contract and wondered what hidden consequences might come from signing her life over to Zachary, even temporarily. Diana woke the next morning with a surge of unfamiliar nervous energy twisting in her stomach. She hadn't slept well, replaying the details of the late-night meeting where she'd agreed to become Zachary Lockhart's fiancée in name only. Now, daylight sharpened her anxieties. When her phone rang, displaying an unknown number, she almost didn't pick up, but there was no turning back. She answered softly, clutching the device with shaky fingers. "Good morning, Miss Diana," said a poised voice on the other end. "This is Mr. Lockhart's assistant. Mr. Lockhart has arranged for a car to collect you at noon. The family is expecting to meet you. Please be ready." Her breath caught. "I understand. Thank you." The assistant ended the call, leaving no room for questions. Diana felt her heart flutter with a mixture of dread and determination. She couldn't forget the image of her mother in that hospital bed. All of this had to be worth it. She took one final glance in the mirror, brushed out her hair, and smoothed a new blouse, a modest piece she'd bought with the bare minimum of the funds Zachary had already provided. Shortly after noon, a sleek black car glided to a stop at the curb in front of her rundown apartment building. Diana's neighbor, an older woman who liked to water her plants on the shared stoop, lifted her eyebrows in surprise. It wasn't often they saw such a luxurious vehicle parked in this neighborhood. Diana managed a polite nod and slipped into the back seat, her pulse roaring in her ears. The ride was silent, and every passing minute seemed to tighten the knot in her chest. She watched through the tinted windows as the streets changed from cramped and noisy to broad avenues lined with ancient trees. Tall gates loomed ahead, wrought iron curlicues painted a glossy black, flanked by manicured hedges. Beyond them was a winding driveway leading to a sprawling mansion. The driver stopped at the main entrance. An impeccably dressed butler and two staff members stood at attention by the massive double doors. Diana stepped out, feeling the cool spring air brush her face. She swallowed hard. This place was a world away from her tiny apartment with its flickering overhead light bulbs. She could only guess what kind of life Zachary led. The butler bowed slightly, guiding her inside. High ceilings soared overhead, and light cascaded through oversized windows. Ornate rugs stretched across polished floors, and gold-framed paintings exuded an air of old money. As Diana followed her guide, she was struck by how quiet everything seemed, as if the entire house was carefully choreographed. "Mr. Lockhart will be with you in the sitting room," the butler said, opening a set of carved double doors. Zachary rose from a velvet sofa wearing a tailored blazer. His gaze swept over Diana quickly, checking her composure. "I'm glad you could make it," he said, sounding detached yet polite. "My grandmother wants to meet you first." Before Diana could reply, the door opened and a woman appeared. Slender and dressed in a conservative yet elegant dress, she carried herself with regal confidence. Her hair was styled impeccably, and she had eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Grandma," Zachary said softly, "this is Diana." The older woman's eyes lingered on Diana's face, politely assessing. "Diana, is it? Lovely to meet you." Her voice was warm enough to be pleasant, but there was an unmistakable firmness beneath it. "I hope you realize what a serious step this is for both you and my grandson." Diana smiled politely, unsure how to respond. "Yes, ma'am. I appreciate the chance to be here." With a knowing look, Grandma stepped closer, resting a gentle hand on Diana's arm. "We have high standards in this family, but more importantly, we cherish loyalty and genuine love. I do hope you can offer my grandson the happiness he deserves." Diana nodded, a tremor in her stomach. The reminder that this was all an act weighed on her. Yet something in Grandma's eyes hinted at genuine concern. At least the older woman was giving her a chance. Moments later, Zachary's gaze flicked past Diana's shoulder, and she turned to see another presence in the doorway. A slender woman in a fitted navy dress stood with pursed lips and narrowed eyes, examining Diana as though she were an interesting specimen. "Ah, Aunt Malvina," Zachary said briskly, gesturing her over. "This is Diana." Malvina's eyes slid up and down, taking in every detail. "So I've heard." "Welcome," she offered, though her tone lacked any real warmth. Her lips curved in what might have been an attempt at a smile, but it looked more like a polite sneer. Diana forced a smile, feeling the scrutiny as keenly as a bright spotlight. Something about Aunt Malvina's stare unnerved her, like the woman was already cataloging potential flaws and inconsistencies. Within moments, Zachary excused them from the sitting room and guided Diana down a corridor lined with massive oil portraits of stern-faced ancestors. "You're doing fine," he murmured, leaning in as they walked. "Just remember our story." She nodded, heart pounding. "We met at a charity auction in the city, correct?" Zachary's lip quirked. "Yes. We chatted about your volunteer work. You impressed me, I pursued you, we've been together since." Before she could respond, he nudged open a set of ornate doors leading into a grand dining hall. A long table already decorated with fresh flowers and fine china extended under a chandelier dripping with crystal. Family members or close acquaintances, Diana couldn't guess which, were already seated. Murmured conversation hung in the air, instantly dropping a few decibels as she and Zachary stepped in. With a steadying breath, Diana took her seat near Zachary at the head of the table. A swirl of scents teased her nose. Roasted herbs, fresh bread, rich sauces. Crystal glasses gleamed, parentally filled with wine. She tried to maintain an air of calm, though she could feel eyes appraising every detail, from her posture to the way she lifted her fork. A soft, polite conversation rolled around the table. Diana introduced herself to those who asked, trying not to stumble over the lines she and Zachary had rehearsed. She spoke of volunteer work at a local shelter, which was parentally true. She had once organized a small fundraiser. But in this setting, everything felt magnified, as though a single slip would unravel their entire story. When a sandy-haired cousin leaned in, politely curious, Diana repeated the anecdote of how she and Zachary met at the charity event. The cousin frowned slightly. "I never realized Zachary even went to that function," he said. "I thought he was in Europe at the time." Diana's face heated, and she scrambled for a plausible explanation. "He was traveling, yes, but flew back for just a day to finalize some details. I suppose it was a quick trip." Aunt Malvina, seated further down, caught Diana's words and gave a knowing tilt of her head. "Zachary is full of surprises. Who could keep track?" She chimed in. Her tone dipped in subtle sarcasm. Zachary cleared his throat, laying a protective hand over Diana's on the table. Though the contact startled her, it served its purpose, redirecting attention. "I do my best, Aunt Malvina. After all, I couldn't possibly miss meeting someone so important." Diana realized she should reciprocate the affectionate gesture, so she curled her fingers around his. It felt staged and stiff, but from the outside she hoped it looked natural. Her entire body blazed with self-consciousness. Dinner stretched on. Courses were presented with polished ceremony. Soups in delicate porcelain bowls, carved meats on silver trays, intricate desserts arranged like edible art. Diana tried to remain poised, sipping her water when her throat went dry with nerves. At one point, Aunt Malvina smiled sweetly and asked, "So, Diana, which part of the city did you grow up in?" Diana froze. She was from a working-class neighborhood, and her background was no secret, but she doubted Aunt Malvina's question was innocent. "I'm from Brookside," she replied evenly, recalling its narrow streets and humble shops. Malvina hummed in acknowledgement. "I see. And your parents? They're well?" Zachary stiffened beside Diana. She cast a quick, grateful glance his way before looking back at Aunt Malvina. "My father passed away a while back. My mother is currently receiving medical care." For a beat, the table quieted. It was as if everyone collectively sensed the awkward turn. Grandma cleared her throat delicately, shifting the subject. "We're so sorry for your hardship, my dear. We trust Zachary will take good care of you." Diana nodded, grateful for the reprieve. She couldn't help noticing that Aunt Malvina retained a thoughtful expression, a small glint in her eyes as though she'd discovered a clue. When dinner concluded, Grandma gave a small, satisfied smile as the family stood. Zachary escorted Diana toward the wide staircase that split the mansion's foyer, leading her upstairs to a guest room while the others drifted off to different wings. The plush carpet softened her footsteps, but her heartbeat still thudded from the interrogation at dinner. "Breathe," Zachary whispered, finally releasing her hand. "You did fine." "Did I? Your aunt seems determined to dig up everything about me." His expression hardened. "Don't worry about her. She likes to test everyone who enters the family. We just need to keep consistent." She forced a nod. "I'll try to remember every detail." Inside the guest room, she closed the door, sinking onto the edge of the bed. Her pulse was still in overdrive from the conversation downstairs. She almost jumped when her phone rang again, seeing her best friend's number light up the screen. "Hey," Diana said, relief flooding her voice. "Diana, how is it?" came her friend's worried question. "You sound exhausted." "It's intense. His family is watching every move I make, especially his aunt. I had to memorize so many details, it's all swirling around in my head." Static cut through the connection, and her friend's voice crackled. "Stay calm, and remember." Then the call dropped. Diana exhaled, slumping onto the bed. Even that tiny bit of reassurance disappeared into the dead air of poor reception. Later that night, just as she had finally managed to still her trembling hands, there was a gentle knock. She walked to the door and found Zachary standing in the hallway, his expression softer than usual. "Sorry," he said quietly. "I know tonight was a lot." His eyes flicked around the corridor, ensuring no one else was there. "If you need anything, just let me know. I'll do my best to shield you from the family pressure." She noticed the faint lines of worry around his eyes. It reminded her that this was no simple game for him either. "Thank you," she replied. "I appreciate that." He hesitated, searching her face, then gave a brief nod. For a moment, their gazes held in a shared understanding, each locked into a contract neither of them truly wanted, yet bound by necessity. In that stillness, Diana sensed an odd comfort in knowing she wasn't entirely alone. Long after he left, she remained by the window, staring out at the moonlit grounds. She couldn't shake the weight of Aunt Malvina's prying questions, the suspicious looks, and the silent judgment from a table full of powerful strangers. A single slip could unravel everything. Despite exhaustion pulling at her, she couldn't drift into sleep. So she opened her door, intending to step into the corridor for a glass of water. That was when she heard Aunt Malvina's voice, low and pointed, echoing from around the corner. "We have to investigate this new fiancé," Aunt Malvina was whispering to someone, her tone sharp with conviction. "We can't let a fraud into this family." Diana's stomach clenched. She slipped back into her room, heart pounding, the words replaying in her head. Morning light crept into the room as Diana stirred, the soft murmurs of voices drifting through the hallway outside. Her eyes fluttered open, recalling the hushed exchange she'd overheard the night before. Aunt Malvina was clearly determined to uncover every detail of Diana's background. That knowledge gnawed at her as she rose from bed, changing into a simple blouse and skirt before venturing out into the corridor. She passed two maids talking under their breath, carrying fresh linens. They paused to curtsy, a formal gesture that still felt foreign to Diana. As the maids moved on, she continued down the polished floor until she heard Zachary's low baritone beckoning her to the breakfast room. Bracing herself, she entered a sunlit space where a long table stood beneath a crystal chandelier, delicate pastries and fruit arranged on fine china. Zachary sat at the far end, reading something on his phone. He glanced up and nodded, motioning for her to sit. His expression remained reserved, but she sensed a current of concern in his eyes. The staff, hovering discreetly, seemed to watch her every move. "Morning," he said, putting his phone aside. "I thought it'd be best if we had breakfast together." Diana tried to smile, her nerves still raw. "Yes, of course." She took a seat opposite him, the silence wrapped in the faint clink of silverware on porcelain. Before they could exchange more than a polite greeting, Grandma glided into the room, setting a measured gaze upon Diana. Her dress was pressed and elegant, her posture regal. "Zachary," Grandma said warmly, then shifted her focus. "And Diana, how lovely to see you. I hope you slept well?" Diana fought the flutter in her stomach. "Yes, thank you," she replied. "Wonderful." Grandma claimed a chair near them, signaling to the staff for tea. "I remember Zachary mentioning how you met. It was at that charity event in the city. Why don't you tell me more, Diana? We're all ears." A little jolt of panic surged inside her. They had practiced details of this story, but the presence of both Zachary and Grandma made her uneasy. She cleared her throat. I was volunteering at the registration table, helping organize donations for underprivileged schools." Grandma's brows rose slightly. "What a noble cause," Diana continued, trying not to fumble. "I'd spilled coffee on some of the pamphlets. My clumsiness, really. And Zachary offered to help me print new ones. We ended up talking about his travels." She glanced sideways at Zachary, who gave her a slight nod. Grandma's lips curved, but her eyes held curiosity. "And that's how you caught my grandson's attention?" Zachary leaned in smoothly, taking over. "She caught my attention in many ways, Grandma," he said, saving Diana from further questions. "I found her dedication admirable." A brief, hesitant laugh escaped Diana's throat. She was relieved he'd stepped in before the conversation tripped her up. Grandma sipped her tea, clearly weighing every word. Then, in an unexpected twist, she turned to Diana with a friendlier tone. "I imagine that experience must have been quite the adventure. Reminds me of when I volunteered at a local orphanage as a girl. One day, I was so frightened by a large dog that belonged to the caretaker, I spilled an entire bucket of paint across the courtyard." Diana offered a genuine smile this time. "I've definitely had my share of embarrassing accidents. In fact, when I was a child, my mother tried to teach me how to bake bread. I misread the instructions and used salt instead of sugar. The result was inedible, to say the least." Grandma chuckled lightly. "Ah, I see we share that tendency to make memorable messes. It builds character." Zachary's tense posture softened. Diana felt a small burst of relief that Grandma seemed to be warming to her, even if ever so slightly. After finishing breakfast, Grandma excused herself with a final glance that hinted she remained vigilant, but her demeanor was kinder than before. Soon after Grandma's departure, Zachary led Diana to his private study, a spacious room lined with dark wooden shelves filled with old volumes and ledgers. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating a broad desk stacked with files. "We need to finalize the details of our story," he said quietly, closing the door behind them. "Grandma's questions will only become more precise." Diana nodded, her nerves returning. She hovered near the desk while he spread out notes they'd compiled. Together, they pieced together a coherent timeline from their first meeting to their first official date. Whenever Diana struggled to remember the finer points, Zachary patiently filled in the gaps. At one point, their hands brushed while reaching for the same sheet of paper. A mild electric thrill shot through her. Their eyes locked just for a second before both looked away, faintly unsettled. The more time they spent faking affection, the more unexpectedly real these fleeting moments began to feel. Zachary's phone buzzed loudly, drawing him out of the moment. He glanced at the screen and a flicker of tension crossed his features. "I have to take this," he said, stepping into the corridor with a terse expression. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Diana alone in the study. She inhaled slowly, letting her eyes wander across the rows of books and framed awards. Family photographs adorned one corner of the desk, Zachary as a boy standing next to a stern-looking man, presumably his father. A swirl of emotions made her chest tighten as she realized how little she actually knew about him beyond their contract. He returned minutes later, tension carved into his face. "Sorry about that. Family business. Nothing you need to worry about." His curt tone indicated otherwise. Still, Diana didn't press for details. They returned to solidifying their story, but a strained silence lingered. Later that afternoon, with Zachary called away again to attend to more phone calls, Diana decided to explore the mansion on her own. Turning down one hallway, she found a gallery of oil portraits. Each face gazed down at her, some severe, some with the faintest hint of a smile. She read the tiny plaques, ancestors who had shaped the Lockhart legacy. Their eyes, even rendered in paint, seemed to judge her presence. While passing an especially imposing portrait of a silver-haired patriarch, footsteps sounded behind her. She turned to see Aunt Malvina approaching. The older woman's gaze pinned Diana where she stood, silent contempt lurking behind her calm facade. "So," Malvina began, her voice a near whisper, "enjoying your little tour?" Diana's throat felt dry. "Just curious about Zachary's family history." Malvina moved closer, tilting her head. "History is everything to us. We have a reputation to protect. I'm sure you're aware." She paused, letting the words sink in. "If you came here for money or status, you'd do well to reconsider. The Lockhart name is powerful. Don't expect it to come without a price." Diana's stomach clenched. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she managed. "I care about Zachary." Malvina's thin smile revealed more threat than warmth. "As you should. But I will be watching." With that, she turned on her heel and disappeared down the corridor, leaving a lingering sense of unease in her wake. Shaken, Diana pulled out her phone to call the hospital for an update on her mother. Relief flooded her when the nurse said her mother was stable, though additional treatments would be required soon. More bills, more money. She promised the nurse everything would be covered, hoping the contract arrangement would continue to hold. By early evening, her best friend arrived unannounced, escorted by a surprised member of the household staff. Diana met her in a small side parlor near the kitchen, relief blooming at the sight of a familiar face. They embraced quickly. "What on earth is going on?" her friend whispered. "This place is insane. The staff is so formal and I nearly got lost twice." "It's a lot," Diana admitted, biting her lip. "They're scrutinizing everything. Aunt Malvina especially." Her friend frowned. Please be careful. One slip and they'll devour you. Don't let yourself get too caught up in, well, you know. Her gaze flicked meaningfully toward the corridor where she'd seen Zachary pass. Diana's cheeks warmed. I won't. I know why I'm here. Their conversation ended too soon, as staff politely escorted her friend out. The abrupt departure left Diana lonelier than before. Not an hour later, raised voices echoed from near the staircase. She hurried out just as Zachary and Aunt Malvina confronted each other in the main foyer. Several maids lingered, looking on anxiously. I know you've been digging around, Aunt, Zachary accused, his voice low but heated. You have no right to treat Diana like some criminal. Malvina squared her shoulders. I have every right. This engagement is suspicious. Don't expect me to stay quiet. You're overstepping, he hissed. Stay out of my affairs. It was a rare moment of unleashed fury from Zachary, who usually wore a mask of composure. Before things could escalate further, Diana stepped forward, her hands trembling. Please, she interjected, her voice loud enough to be heard by both. This isn't the place or the time for an argument. Can't we discuss this privately? The small crowd watched in silence. Aunt Malvina glared at her, but Zachary nodded curtly, tension visible in his clenched jaw. Together they dispersed, leaving the staff staring after them. The moment felt surreal, Diana realizing she'd just placed herself in the middle of a powerful family's simmering conflict. Later, when the dust had settled, Zachary found Diana alone in the same side parlor. He seemed calmer now, though worn by the day's drama. You handled that well, he said, arms crossed as he leaned against the doorframe. Thank you for stepping in. She shifted, remembering the emotion she'd seen in his eyes earlier. I only did what seemed right. We're supposed to be a team, right? A ghost of a smile tugged at his lips. The tension between them felt different than before, no longer purely contractual, but warmer, more human. He nodded, softly repeating, a team. For a moment, silence enveloped them, and Diana found herself studying his features in a new light. She realized he wasn't quite the aloof billionaire she'd imagined on the first night. He carried burdens, family expectations, responsibilities, and perhaps deeper wounds she didn't yet understand. They parted ways soon after, each retreating to the refuge of their rooms. Late that night, unable to sleep, Diana wandered into the quiet corridor. She saw a faint glow seeping from beneath the door of Zachary's study. Stepping closer, she noticed his phone resting on a nearby side table, its screen alight with a text message notification. Something about the message caught her eye. It read, Urgent meeting to discuss keeping up the ruse. We can't afford any slips. Her breath hitched. She wondered what else Zachary was hiding, and whether Aunt Malvina's suspicions weren't the only threat lurking in this mansion. Diana sees a text on Zachary's phone referencing an urgent meeting about keeping up the ruse. She wonders if there's more to fear than just Aunt Malvina. Diana stood in the dimly lit hallway, her heart hammering as she stared at the glowing screen of Zachary's phone. She'd just glimpsed a message about an urgent meeting to keep up the ruse. The words weighed heavily on her. When she sensed Zachary approaching, she turned to face him, refusing to let her apprehension hide behind silence. What's going on? She asked quietly, lifting the phone so he could see the text. This isn't just about family business, is it? He paused, one hand still resting on the doorframe, tension in the set of his shoulders. It is business, he insisted in a low voice. I promise it's nothing you need to worry about. She held his gaze, refusing to look away first. I'm already in the middle of all this. If there's something more going on, I deserve to know. Zachary exhaled, then reached for his phone. It's related to the inheritance, that's it. He sighed, frustration edging into his tone. My grandmother's conditions become stricter by the day. She's scheduling these meetings to ensure everything looks convincing. I don't want to drag you into the ugliest parts of it. Though his explanation felt only half complete, Diana allowed it to sit. She was too tired to argue further, and the flicker of tension in his voice told her pressing him harder wouldn't help. With a reluctant nod, she handed his phone back and turned away, unsettled by the sense that something was slowly tightening around them both. The next day, Diana was up early, packing her belongings into 2 worn suitcases. She'd officially be moving into the mansion. That arrangement hadn't been spelled out so clearly before, but Grandma's sudden insistence that they display a genuine engagement left no room for any other possibility. When Zachary's driver arrived to transport her, she caught a glimpse of her neighbors peering from their windows, curious about the fancy car that purred outside her building. She felt strange leaving the shabby walls of her old apartment, uncertain if she'd ever truly return. Staff greeted her at the mansion's entrance, stepping forward to carry her bags inside. Their polite smiles carried that same hint of watchful curiosity she'd encountered before, as though each was mentally cataloging every sign of her background. Despite her discomfort, she kept her head high, reminding herself she had no choice. Her mother's treatments depended on her seeing this through. Grandma waited in the front parlor, an expanse of elegantly furnished space where sunlight streamed through tall windows. The moment Diana stepped inside, Grandma beckoned with a graceful nod. On the table before her lay a stack of official-looking documents. Zachary stood nearby, hands in his pockets, grim-faced as though he already knew what was coming. "Diana," Grandma said by way of greeting, gesturing for her to join them. She tapped the top page of the documents. "These are my terms. Zachary's father once put the family name in jeopardy with irresponsible decisions. I won't see that happen again. I require proof of stability within the month. Public appearances, proper decorum, a united front that convinces even the most skeptical members of our circle." Her gaze flicked to Diana. "That includes you." Diana's spine prickled under the weight of the words. She recalled the rumor about Zachary's father, a scandal that left the family wary of any whiff of dishonesty. She swallowed, nodding. "I understand." Grandma's lips pressed into a thin line. "Very well. Zachary, ensure our dear Diana is fully settled. Let's not give anyone a reason to doubt." Zachary inhaled, looking at Diana with a quiet apology in his eyes. "We'll handle it, Grandma." Once the documents were signed, Grandma rose and swept out, leaving Diana standing there with uncertainty swirling in her chest. Zachary placed a hand gently on her arm. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't realize her demands would get this intense so quickly." She shrugged, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's all right. We'll just do what we must." He gave a tight nod, then escorted her to the room that would now be hers. Passing corridors she already knew, she felt a new weight pressing down, an awareness that these halls, these walls, were now her daily surroundings. As they climbed the wide staircase, the hush around them felt loaded with expectation, like they had stepped onto a grand stage with unforgiving lights trained on them. In the evening, exhausted from unpacking, Diana was startled by a sound in the hallway. Voices drifted from behind a par-entally closed door near the back stairs. She glanced around, realizing no one else was in sight. Curiosity overcame her better judgment, and she approached on tiptoe. Inside the dusty old study, she caught a glimpse of tattered ledgers and documents stacked haphazardly on a massive desk. The conversation stopped abruptly as she leaned closer. She pushed the door open just enough to peek. The lamp inside flickered over an open ledger bearing a Lockhart crest, accompanied by newspaper clippings that referenced Zachary's father. The headlines hinted at deceit and financial mismanagement, an era of scandal that had tarnished the family name. As Diana scanned these old pages, her eyes settled on an underlined paragraph mentioning coercion and loans. A chill worked its way up her spine, reminding her that for all her desperation, the Lockhart family had their own ghosts. Footsteps sounded behind her, and she jerked upright. Aunt Malvina stood there, arms folded, eyes cold as flint. Though Diana expected a sharp reprimand, Malvina said nothing, only gave a tight smile that did little to hide suspicion. She gestured for Diana to step aside, closed the door to the study herself, and swept away without a word. The silence felt more ominous than any scolding. Later that night, Diana found Zachary in the living room, sitting alone on a leather sofa bathed in the warm glow of a single lamp. The staff had retired for the night, leaving the mansion wrapped in quiet. Shadows flickered across his tense features as he stared at the empty fireplace. "You shouldn't wander alone in certain parts of the house," he said softly, sensing her presence without looking up. "Aunt Malvina is always searching for something to use against us." She sank onto a nearby chair, hands clasped. "I stumbled on some documents about your father. They seemed important." Zachary's gaze darkened. "They are. My father's mistakes nearly destroyed everything. Grandma believes it's why I need to prove myself, to show I can keep the family's reputation untarnished." He paused, his voice tinged with sadness. "I'm worried for you too. Malvina isn't above dirty tricks." Diana shivered. "Is that why you're pushing yourself so hard? The inheritance deadlines, the pressure from Grandma? It feels suffocating." He nodded, shoulders slumping. "I can't fail. But I don't want you to get hurt. This is more dangerous than I realized." A thud upstairs made them both jump. Diana's heart kicked into high gear as they exchanged alarmed looks. They went to investigate and found a large ottoman had been pushed halfway across the corridor, blocking the route to the guest rooms. Its heavy legs left deep scrapes on the polished wood. Diana frowned, confused at how it could have ended up in such a precarious spot. Zachary helped her move it aside, and they spotted a small scatter of nails on the floor, as though someone had left them there deliberately. "An accident?" she ventured, but her voice shook. Zachary's jaw tightened. "It's like someone wanted you to trip in the dark." Her mind reeled at the thought that someone might be actively sabotaging her. Before they could dwell further, her phone buzzed. Anxiously, she answered, hearing the hospital's muffled sounds on the other end. The nurse's polite voice was filled with concern. Her mother required another costly procedure soon. Diana's throat closed, thinking of the mounting bills. She forced out a promise that she'd get the money. Zachary overheard, and when she ended the call, he placed his hand lightly over hers. "Let me handle it. We'll pay for whatever's necessary." Emotion surged through Diana. "I can't ask." "You're not asking," he cut in gently. "It's part of this arrangement, yes, but—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Yet the quiet kindness in his eyes said more than words. Her heart twisted in her chest. The contract was supposed to be purely transactional, but moments like these made her realize he possessed depths of sincerity beneath his polished exterior. They lingered by the corridor's dim lamp, voices subdued. For the first time, they shared fragments of their deeper fears, her mother's fragility, his worry about failing not just Grandma but the memory of a tarnished father he still loved. Words poured out in hushed confessions, forging a bond that felt strangely comforting. Their gazes locked in the half-light, and the tension grew palpable. Slowly they leaned closer, unsure if it was right or wise. A sudden cough broke the moment. One of the household staff stood at the far end of the corridor, clearly embarrassed. Diana and Zachary sprang apart, heat rising in their cheeks. The staff member apologized and vanished. In the silence that followed, neither of them knew where to look. Eventually, they parted ways. Zachary retreated to his study. Diana went to her new room, heart racing with a mix of relief and disquiet. She wondered who had moved that ottoman, why nails had been scattered on the floor, and whether Aunt Malvina knew more than she let on. Long past midnight, Diana shifted restlessly in bed. The mansion's old bones creaked. In her half-sleep, a faint scraping sound dragged her back to awareness. She pushed upright, breath suspended, realizing it came from the hallway outside her door. Gathering her courage, she got up and tiptoed across the carpet, opening the door just enough to see. A dark figure slid something flat beneath it, then disappeared into the shadows. Her pulse thundered. She retrieved a sealed envelope from the floor, her name scrawled across the front in spidery handwriting. Inside lay a single note, its message unsettlingly brief. "You can't hide forever." Diana stood at her dresser, staring at the unsigned note she had received in the middle of the night. A warning, blunt and cruel. "Leave while you still can." Every time she read those words, a tremor of dread surged through her. Whoever had slipped it under her door wanted her out of this house, and the tone was urgent enough that she couldn't dismiss it as a casual prank. At breakfast, she forced a bright expression as she joined Zachary and Grandma at the lavish dining table. She tucked the note into her sweater pocket, determined not to show how deeply it rattled her. Aunt Malvina was notably absent from the meal, but Diana sensed her presence in every corner, as if the aunt's suspicious gaze still lingered. Grandma greeted Diana with polite warmth, pouring tea and inquiring about her night. Zachary glanced over, a subtle question in his eyes, but she offered a small smile in return, deflecting any conversation about the envelope. Meanwhile, Grandma wasted no time explaining that the Lockhart family was hosting a grand charity event in just a few days. An event meant to showcase their generosity and, it seemed, prove the stability of Zachary's newfound engagement. "It's an annual tradition," Grandma announced. "We invite the press, local benefactors, and family friends. There will be tours of the mansion, a silent auction, and a formal dinner. Diana, you'll attend at Zachary's side, of course." Diana could only nod, shoulders tense. She felt Zachary's hand cover hers beneath the table. The gesture, brief and careful, soothed some of her nerves. But as soon as breakfast ended, Grandma pressed two more demands. Diana was to practice greeting guests at a certain etiquette standard, and she had to dress impeccably for the big day. "Have a fitting," Grandma suggested pointedly, eyeing Diana's simple skirt. "I'll see to it that a stylist helps you." Diana felt self-conscious but smiled in acquiescence. Money was no longer her main barrier. Zachary had given her the means. Yet she hated the realization that everything she did, from her hair to her mannerisms, could be picked apart by Aunt Malvina or anyone else hoping to see her fail. Later that morning, while exploring the house, Diana came across Aunt Malvina by accident near the library. The older woman wore a sharp navy ensemble and stood among shelves stacked with heavy volumes. Spread out on a nearby table were documents pertaining to the upcoming charity event. Donation lists, schedules, guest rosters. Diana offered a polite greeting, but Malvina merely raised a brow and continued sifting through pages. When Malvina stepped out, presumably to fetch something, Diana noticed a critical folder left behind. The label read, "Charity Auction Items." She recalled Grandma mentioning that important papers had gone missing recently. Could these be the missing documents? It struck her as odd that they were casually lying on this table, especially given Malvina's intense protectiveness. Diana picked up the folder, flipping through the pages. Intricate details about auction items, jewelry, art pieces, vacations, were meticulously listed alongside the donors' names. Everything Grandma would need to run the event smoothly. If these documents hadn't been found, the charity function would face serious embarrassment. She wondered if she should return them to Grandma or hand them to Zachary. Just then, Malvina reappeared, silently closing the library door behind her. Diana tensed, the folder still in her hands. Malvina's lips curved into a thin, polite smile. "Curious, are we?" These look important," Diana stammered. "Grandma said they were missing. I was just making sure they're kept safe." "How thoughtful." Malvina's tone dripped with sarcasm. She took the folder, glancing through it as if verifying Diana hadn't meddled with the contents. "Why don't you leave such matters to the family?" she added, voice laced with condescension. "We wouldn't want you overwhelmed, especially with the big event coming up, dear." Without waiting for a reply, Malvina swept out, the folder under her arm. Diana stood there a moment, heart thumping. It felt as if the aunt had set a trap, intentionally leaving crucial files in plain sight to test her. She shook off the uneasy feeling and resolved to steer clear of Malvina's path as much as possible. In the afternoon, she retreated to her room for a moment of calm. A phone call from the hospital interrupted her thoughts. Her mother's condition was finally showing mild improvement, the nurse reported, though more procedures were on the horizon. Diana clutched her phone, relief and gratitude washing over her. Thanks to the money from Zachary, some of the pressure was off. For the first time in weeks, she felt a wave of hope that her mother might eventually pull through and return home. With her spirits lifted, Diana found the courage to leave her room and speak with Grandma. The older woman appeared in the solarium, tending to a set of potted orchids. The sunlight filtered through the glass walls, illuminating the vibrant blooms. Diana paused, appreciating the scene. Grandma had never looked more serene. "You seem peaceful," Diana commented softly, stepping closer. Grandma smiled, though her eyes remained a touch guarded. "I come here to clear my head. These orchids require just the right balance of light and moisture. If I neglect them, they wither quickly." Diana nodded, thinking how the family's trust must be cultivated just as delicately. Grandma abruptly turned to her, expression softening slightly. "Zachary told me about your mother's condition. I'm glad to hear she's stable. Family is everything, Diana. Even if we're cautious, it's only because we want to protect what we've built." For a moment, Grandma's tone was devoid of judgment, almost maternal. Diana mustered a sincere, "Thank you." In that brief instant, she glimpsed a kinder side to the Lockhart matriarch, a side that might be worth winning over. Not long after, a stylist arrived at the mansion. She whisked Diana away to a small sitting room that had been converted into a makeshift studio, bustling with racks of designer dresses and pairs of heels in every color. Over the next hour, they tested fabrics and silhouettes, measuring Diana carefully for the gala attire. Despite her discomfort at being fussed over, Diana cooperated, knowing Grandma and Zachary expected her to look the part of a poised fiancée. Eventually, drained by the day's tension, she slipped away to the garden at dusk. The reflecting pool lay in the center, its surface flickering with the last rays of sunlight. Surrounded by manicured shrubs and tucked-away seating areas, it felt almost like a hidden oasis amid the grand mansion. She inhaled the fresh air, let her shoulders relax, and tried to clear her head. Moments later, Zachary approached, stepping softly on the path. He settled beside her on a stone bench. For a time, they both watched the water in silence, the golden glow of evening reflecting off their faces. "How are you holding up?" he finally asked, voice gentle. "Tired," she admitted, "and a bit uncertain. Malvina's warnings, Grandma's expectations, that strange note. Sometimes I wonder if I've made a terrible mistake." His gaze flicked to her, concerned. "I won't let anything happen to you," he said. "I know we started this for our own reasons, but I don't want you to feel alone in all this." Warmth spread through her at his words. They sat closer, sharing small stories of their youth. She described learning to make paper flowers for a school festival. He spoke quietly of times he'd traveled with his father before the scandals, recalling glimpses of a man who had once been kind and fun-loving. Each confession made their connection feel more genuine, dissolving some of the walls they'd built around themselves. But the gentle mood was soon overshadowed by the reality of the next day's events. The charity gala loomed large, and with it, the possibility that Aunt Malvina would seize any opening to expose Diana's lack of pedigree or sincerity. Zachary squeezed her hand, as if to reassure her that they'd face the public together. Night fell, and they finally parted ways. Diana walked back into the mansion's grand corridors, past staff who were busy transporting decorations and prepping every room for the influx of guests. Her head buzzed with nerves. After everything, she couldn't shake the sense of a looming confrontation, of hidden eyes watching her every move. Hours later, she finished a final fitting for her dress, the stylist nodding approval before whisking the gown away for last-minute adjustments. Standing in the hallway, Diana felt a sudden rush of dizziness. She pressed a hand to her temple, leaning against the wall until the feeling passed. Nausea churned in her stomach, and a thin layer of sweat broke out on her brow. She tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself it was likely stress. Yet the dizziness lingered, returning in waves. Her heart pounded as she hurried to her room, hoping to lie down. But the discomfort was more intense than the usual tension headache. Something felt distinctly off. On the eve of the charity event, Diana experienced a sudden bout of dizziness and nausea that wouldn't go away. She felt something was very different about her body. Diana woke at dawn to the rising swirl of nausea she had felt the night before, this time sharper and more insistent. She pressed a hand to her stomach, inhaling shakily. Her first thought was that it had to be anxiety from the looming charity gala. Yet as the minutes crawled by and the sickness refused to subside, she sensed something else was at play. The house was still quiet, most of the staff not yet stirring. She dressed hurriedly in a comfortable sweater and jeans, slipping out of her room with careful steps. The early morning light crept through the tall windows, illuminating her path as she made her way downstairs. Outside, the air was cool against her flushed cheeks. She flagged down a passing taxi from beyond the mansion gates, ignoring the driver's curious glance. The ride to the local clinic took longer than she wished, traffic inching along slowly. At the clinic, the antiseptic scent and the murmur of hushed voices made her heart pound. She approached the reception desk, explaining she felt dizzy, nauseous, and faint. An older nurse, kind-faced, led her into a small examination room. Diana found herself sitting on a crinkling paper sheet, hands clenched in her lap. A short while later, a doctor entered, greeting her with a polite smile. After some quick tests, he gently asked if she could be pregnant. She froze, remembering the single unplanned night of closeness with Zachary, an evening when their guarded walls momentarily fell away, leaving them both emotionally exposed and physically tangled. The possibility she'd brushed aside now roared to life in her mind. She managed a nod, cheeks burning. The nurse returned to draw blood, and Diana waited anxiously for the results. Every second felt like an hour, her thoughts racing through the ramifications. She was supposed to be here solely under contract, an arrangement. What if it had suddenly become irreversible? Eventually, the doctor reappeared, his expression cautious. "You are pregnant," he said. "We can confirm that much. I'd like to run an ultrasound to see how far along you might be and check everything else." An inexplicable tremor ran through her body. She followed him to another small room where he readied the machine with practiced efficiency. The gel felt cold against her abdomen. Diana gritted her teeth, heart stuttering in her chest. Then, on the screen, shapes and flickers began to emerge. The doctor's face took on a look of mild surprise. "You're carrying 3, he said at last, carefully pointing. "Triplets, all with healthy heartbeats from what I can tell." Diana's breath caught in her throat. The world seemed to contract and expand at once, her vision swimming as she processed the enormity of it, 3 lives taking root inside her. She felt tears burn at the back of her eyes, a tidal wave of awe and fear. Triplets? She could hardly wrap her mind around a single baby. How was she supposed to handle 3? The doctor asked if she was all right. She nodded, though her voice failed her. After wiping off the gel, she clutched the printed ultrasound image in trembling fingers, as though it might vanish if she let go. The doctor offered some calm advice about scheduling proper prenatal care, but his words drifted like echoes. All Diana could do was stare at the tiny outlines and the faint indication of multiple heartbeats. Moments later, she stepped out of the exam room, her legs unsteady. The nurse kindly reminded her to get adequate rest and to return for follow-up soon. Diana paid at the front desk in a daze, not caring that the receptionist cast curious looks at her obvious shock. Her phone started buzzing. She saw it was Zachary, likely wondering where she had gone so early. She couldn't bring herself to answer, still grappling with the news. As she exited the clinic, she nearly collided with Aunt Malvina, who stood there in the waiting area, as if by some cruel twist of fate. Malvina's eyes narrowed instantly. "What a coincidence," she said, tone crisp. "What brings you here at such an hour?" Diana's pulse thundered. She scrambled for a lie. "I wasn't feeling well," she muttered. "Just needed a quick checkup." Malvina surveyed her with open suspicion. "Are you sure that's all?" She didn't press further, but a calculating flicker in her gaze made Diana uneasy. The older woman swept past her, continuing down the corridor to speak with a nurse. About what? Diana didn't want to guess. She hurried outside, clutching the ultrasound photo hidden beneath her coat. Back in a taxi, she stared out the window, head spinning. She felt an overwhelming need to confide in someone. The thought of her best friend gave her a moment's comfort. She dialed quickly, and a welcome, familiar voice answered. "I'm at a clinic," Diana blurted. "I just found out I'm pregnant." "Oh, Diana!" her friend exclaimed. "But, wait, with Zachary's—" "Yes," Diana whispered, throat tight. She hesitated, then spoke the words that still felt unreal. "Triplets." A hush fell on the other end of the line, then hurried reassurances. "Calm down. We'll figure this out. But you have to tell him soon, don't you?" Diana's gaze dropped to the ultrasound photo. "I know," she whispered, her voice quavering. The call ended with her friend urging her to be careful, to plan how she would break the news. Diana sat back in the taxi, trying to quell the panic beneath her ribcage. She arrived at the mansion in the late morning, hoping no one had noticed her absence. Staff bustled about, busy with last-minute preparations for the charity gala. She slipped in quietly and retreated to her room, her mind still echoing with the phrase, "triplets." Any fantasies of a discreet pregnancy vanished. There would be no hiding this for long. Afternoon came, and she dutifully appeared in the foyer, wearing the elegant gown chosen for the event. Cameras flashed outside as guests arrived in gleaming cars, donating to the cause and socializing in the garden. Grandma greeted each patron with poised warmth, while Aunt Malvina hovered nearby, exchanging pleasantries in that thinly veiled manner. Diana's stomach lurched, both from nerves and the lingering nausea of early pregnancy. A hush fell when Zachary stepped to the front of the foyer to deliver a short speech about family values and charitable legacy. He spoke confidently, his presence commanding the crowd's attention. Yet as his words echoed across the marble floor, Diana felt her legs threaten to buckle. Cold sweat formed on her brow. She realized with alarm that the dizziness was returning, stronger this time. She tried to steady herself, but her vision blurred. The last thing she wanted was to create a scene, not here, not with the entire family and the press watching. Struggling to remain upright, she managed a weak smile at an approaching guest, but her knees wobbled, forcing her to grab a nearby pillar for support. Zachary caught sight of her unsteadiness. He quickly concluded his remarks and rushed to her side. She leaned on him, her face pale. Aunt Malvina observed with hawk-like focus, a strange smile curling her lips as if she sensed something amiss. "You're not well," Zachary whispered urgently. "We need to get you some air." She tried to push through the fog in her mind. "I'm fine. It's just—" But words failed. He guided her to a quieter corner near a row of potted plants, away from prying eyes. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, uncertain if she should confess the truth then and there. Her heart hammered with the weight of it all. "Stay with me," he murmured, sliding an arm around her waist to support her. "What's going on, Diana?" She opened her mouth, about to speak, but the distant click of approaching heels made her freeze. They both turned to see Aunt Malvina's silhouette, lurking by the parted curtains that led into the main hall. With unwelcome timing, a wave of guests spilled in, demanding Zachary's attention. Diana forced a shaky smile, insisting she could manage on her own. He gave her a concerned look before following the crowd back to the gala. Alone, she took a few more moments to steady her breathing, gulping water brought by a passing waiter. The event continued in a swirl of conversation, laughter, and the clink of champagne glasses. Cameras flashed periodically, capturing the curated elegance of the evening. Diana played her part with forced composure, greeting donors and smiling for photos, all the while hiding the knowledge that her life was about to change forever. When the final guests departed, a hush settled on the mansion's grand foyer. Aunt Malvina retired to her suite, Grandma bid everyone good night, and the household staff began tidying. Zachary hesitated in the corridor, looking as though he wanted to follow Diana and demand an explanation. But she disappeared up the staircase, pleading exhaustion. Inside her room, with the door locked, she finally let out a ragged sigh. She peeled off her formal gown, heart still pounding as she changed into a worn t-shirt. Then she retrieved the ultrasound image from her bag. 3 tiny shapes, 3 heartbeats. She rested on the edge of her bed, staring at that picture, heart squeezed by conflicting waves of fear, awe, and love. Triplets, she whispered, the enormity pressing in on all sides. This was supposed to be a simple contract. Now it was real, far beyond any lie they were telling for the inheritance. How would Zachary react? Would he believe her, or think it was some elaborate scam? Late that night, Diana stood in her room, holding the ultrasound picture, whispering, "How will I tell him that we're having 3? Diana rose before dawn, her sleep broken by uneasy dreams and the persistent churn of her unsettled stomach. She stood at her window, fingertips grazing the cold glass as she gazed out at the mansion's expansive grounds. The day was beginning to stir, the sky shifting from violet to pale blue. She slid open her bedside drawer, retrieving the small envelope where she kept her ultrasound image. Her heart squeezed as she studied the faint outlines of 3 tiny forms. Hiding this pregnancy was growing harder, and the weight of her secret pressed heavily on her every breath. She carefully tucked the image away when footsteps echoed in the corridor. The hush of the mansion made every sound sharp, and she braced herself as the door creaked open. Zachary stepped inside without knocking, eyes full of concern. His gaze traveled from her pale cheeks to her trembling hands. "Why are you awake so early?" he asked softly, crossing the room in a few quick strides. "Are you feeling ill again?" She mustered a tight smile. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a steadiness she didn't feel. "Just couldn't sleep." He caught the tremor in her voice. "Diana, you're not yourself lately. You look exhausted." His eyes narrowed, searching her face for answers. The thought of confessing everything rippled through her mind. She imagined how he'd react if she admitted she was carrying his children, 3 of them. But the vision of Aunt Malvina's sardonic grin flashed across her thoughts, and a stab of dread made her chest tighten. She swallowed and tried to sound convincing. "It's just the pressure. Your family, the gala, the contract. It's a lot. I promise I'll be all right." Zachary's brow furrowed with worry, yet he didn't push further. Perhaps he sensed how close to the edge she was. He simply nodded, reached out to lightly squeeze her hand, then slipped out of the room. She exhaled shakily, her relief short-lived. The next crisis would find her soon enough. Before lunchtime, Grandma summoned them both to the library. The stately room was lined with old tomes, and dust motes floated in beams of light. Grandma stood by a towering bookcase, Aunt Malvina a silent shadow at her shoulder. The older woman's greeting was brisk, her gaze flicking between Diana and Zachary. "We have no time to waste," Grandma said, her voice echoing in the hush. "The family expects concrete decisions. This engagement has gone on without a proper wedding date." Aunt Malvina's lips curved into a faint smirk, as though confirming her own suspicions. Diana tried not to fidget. Zachary, however, squared his shoulders. "Grandma, let's not rush," he began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "There are rules, Zachary. You of all people know why the will's conditions exist. If we're to trust your judgment, we need proof of your commitment, or the inheritance may not pass to you at all." A flash of panic stole across Diana's thoughts. A forced wedding date. She glanced at Zachary. Tension was written plainly on his face. Still, he nodded in compliance, likely recognizing he had no alternative. "We'll discuss it," he said in a measured tone. "Diana and I will pick a date soon." Grandma let out a satisfied breath, and Aunt Malvina's eyes gleamed. Without another word, the meeting was over. Zachary steered Diana gently out of the library, guiding her away from Grandma's line of sight. Once they were alone in the corridor, he stopped and looked at her, an apology in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "She's always been strict, but this is worse than I expected." Diana nodded numbly. "You do what you have to do," she said, voice quiet. Her mind reeled. Could she possibly go through a wedding charade while hiding her pregnancy? Before he could say more, one of the staff approached him with a phone message. He excused himself, leaving Diana to wander the hallway alone. She was halfway to her room when her phone buzzed. The hospital again. Her mother's condition had taken a slight turn, and more specialized care would be needed soon. Diana's heart twisted in her chest. The costs were growing by the week. She murmured quick thanks to the nurse and hung up with her head buzzing. This arrangement had to continue no matter the cost to her pride or her heart. She turned a corner, nearly colliding with her best friend, who had just been escorted in by a footman. Relief bloomed at the sight of a friendly face. Diana hurried her friend into a quiet alcove by a large window. "I came as soon as I could," her friend said in a hushed tone. "I've been hearing some alarming rumors. Aunt Malvina is digging into your financial records, your employment history, everything." Diana's stomach clenched. "So it's not just a threat. She's actively searching for anything to prove I'm some sort of gold digger." Her friend nodded, reaching out to squeeze her arm reassuringly. "She's relentless. You need to be prepared. If she finds any small inconsistency, she'll use it to destroy you." Just then, footsteps approached. Zachary strolled by on his way to the study, halting when he overheard bits of their conversation. His face clouded, misunderstanding flickering across his features. "Is there something you two want to tell me?" he asked, a guarded edge in his voice. Diana tried to explain the situation, but Zachary's expression hardened, as though he believed they were plotting some hidden angle. He shot a glance at Diana's friend, then back at Diana. "Are you keeping more secrets? What else do I not know about you?" Her friend lifted her palms helplessly, stepping away to give them space. Diana's cheeks burned with both anger and panic. "You don't understand," she pleaded. "I'm just trying to protect—" He cut her off, vexation bleeding into his tone. "Enough. I see there's a lot you're not telling me. How am I supposed to trust you when you're constantly hiding things?" With that, he strode down the corridor, leaving Diana rooted in place. Her friend gave her a sympathetic look, quietly excused herself, and left. Diana stood there alone, hugging herself as if to contain the turmoil rolling inside her. Soon after, she found Zachary waiting for her in a small salon overlooking the garden. The tension in his posture was palpable. At first, neither of them spoke. Then he turned toward her, eyes full of conflicting emotions. "Tell me the truth, Diana," he said, voice taut. "Are you in more trouble than you've admitted? I can't protect you if you won't let me in." She opened her mouth to speak, her confession on the tip of her tongue. But the words stuck, trapped by fear of how he would react to her pregnancy. He deserved the truth, yet the moment to reveal it didn't feel right, overshadowed by Aunt Malvina's looming threats and the possibility Zachary might suspect it was some elaborate scam. She started, looking away. "I'm not ready to explain everything. Please, trust me a little longer." His jaw set in frustration, but he said nothing. He turned and left the room, leaving her with the echo of her own cowardice. She slumped into a chair, hands pressed against her abdomen. The burden of 3 unborn lives weighed heavily on her resolve. Later that afternoon, while crossing the sunlit corridor, she nearly walked into Aunt Malvina, who stood by a tall window with her arms folded. The aunt regarded Diana with cool disdain, then beckoned her closer. "So," Malvina said, her tone almost pleasant, "I've uncovered quite a bit about your finances and your mother's medical bills. Quite the predicament, isn't it?" Diana stiffened. "Whatever you think you know." Malvina's gaze glinted. "I know enough to expose you. You claim to be so devoted to my nephew, but we both know this all started as a transaction, didn't it?" The words hit like a slap, and Diana forced herself not to shrink back. "Zachary and I have our reasons, but I'm not here to hurt him." A small smile curved Malvina's lips, devoid of warmth. "If you're smart, you'll leave. Walk away before I bring all these findings out in the open. If you go now, I might keep your little secrets to myself." Diana's heart thundered. Part of her wanted to bolt, to flee the scrutiny and fear. But she thought of her mother in that hospital bed, of the triplets she carried, and of the fleeting moments of gentleness she'd shared with Zachary. She lifted her chin. "No," she said steadily. "I won't be bullied. I'm not leaving." Malvina's nostrils flared, her eyes cold as frost. "Then you'll face the consequences, my dear." And with that, she swept away, the quiet click of her heels echoing down the corridor. A few hours later, a hush descended upon the household. Diana happened to pass the main foyer just as a courier delivered a sealed envelope to Aunt Malvina. The aunt took it with a triumphant glint in her eyes, disappearing into a nearby room. From behind a column, Diana watched Aunt Malvina hand the envelope to a well-dressed cousin she barely recognized, presumably someone who stood to gain if Zachary lost the inheritance. The tension between them crackled. Her stomach twisted with alarm. Whatever was in that envelope likely contained the official findings Malvina had boasted about, the means to finally unmask Diana as an opportunist, or worse. When night came, she found no respite. She paced her room, nerves frayed. Just before midnight, a soft knock on her door startled her. Zachary stood there, hands in his pockets, gaze filled with contrition. "I've been unfair," he said. "I'm sorry for doubting you. I'm just anxious. My aunt is stirring trouble, Grandma is pressing for a wedding date, and you're—" He paused, biting off the words. "Different. I can't shake the feeling that something bigger is going on." Diana's eyes burned with unshed tears. "I'm trying," she whispered, not quite meeting his gaze. He exhaled, stepping closer. "I only ask you to let me in. I'd do anything to protect you, if you gave me the chance." Guilt washed over her. She swallowed, pressing one hand over the place where her babies were growing. "I know," she said, "but it's complicated." She could tell he wanted to say more, but after a moment of tense silence, he nodded and turned away, leaving her with the weight of regret. She sank onto the edge of her bed, staring at the door long after he'd gone. Their fragile bond felt strained, as though a single wrong step would shatter it entirely. Unable to sleep, Diana crept through the silent corridors in search of courage. She decided to head to Zachary's study, determined to lay it all out. Her mother's mounting hospital bills, the reason behind her sudden illness, the truth about the night they spent together, and the triplets now growing inside her. But when she slipped into the study, only the faint glow of a desk lamp illuminated the space. As her eyes adjusted, she realized she wasn't alone. Aunt Malvina stood behind the desk, a triumphant gleam in her gaze. She held a stack of documents in one hand, the other pressed to her hip. "Ah, Diana," she purred, "just the person I wanted to see." Diana froze, heart hammering against her ribs, unable to escape the feeling that the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. Diana froze under the study's dim lamp as Aunt Malvina glared at her from behind the desk. A stack of papers rested in the aunt's hands, and the triumphant gleam in her eyes made Diana's stomach lurch. The soft ticking of the grandfather clock down the hall seemed to boom in the silence. "I've done some digging," Malvina said icily. "It's amazing what doctors' offices will reveal with the right incentive." Her lips curved in a thin, cruel smile. "Imagine my surprise when I learned you were not only pregnant but carrying 3, triplets no less." Diana's pulse hammered in her ears. She had never intended for Aunt Malvina to learn the truth this way. "That's none of your business," she managed, though her voice shook. "Oh, but it is." Malvina advanced, the documents rustling in her grip. "You see, I have proof of your hospital visits, the scans, the payments made under Zachary's name, even if indirectly. And now I can expose you for the liar you are." Diana clenched her fists. "I haven't lied about my condition. Yes, I'm pregnant, but—" Malvina's laugh was razor-sharp. "But you just conveniently forgot to mention it to my nephew while you played the dutiful fiancé? How very noble of you." She circled around the desk, each step calculated, like a cat stalking its prey. "We both know there's more to this story. You're after his fortune, and you thought a pregnancy would guarantee it." "That's not true," Diana protested, voice tight with emotion. "I didn't plan any of this." The door burst open then, and Zachary stepped in, eyes flaring with alarm. He scanned the scene, Malvina holding the incriminating papers, Diana trembling in the center of the room. "What's going on?" he demanded, striding forward. Malvina smirked. "Just discovering that our dear Diana has been hiding a rather large secret." She thrust the papers toward him. "Read for yourself. The hospital records. She's pregnant, and apparently, she's claiming you're the father." Zachary's gaze flicked to Diana, stunned. "Pregnant?" he echoed, voice hoarse with disbelief. Diana could see his features harden with confusion and betrayal. Is that true?" Tears burned at Diana's eyes. "Yes, I found out recently. I tried to tell you, but there was never the right time." Malvina cut in, eyes glinting. "Oh, don't be naive, Zachary. This is exactly what she's been after all along. A ticket to the family fortune. She wants to secure her future by saddling you with children who might not even be yours." Zachary's grip on the papers tightened, knuckles white. "Is that what you think?" he asked Diana, voice trembling with anger or perhaps fear. "That I'd just accept this without question? You've been lying to me for weeks." Diana flinched at the accusation. "I never lied about who the father is. Yes, I hid the pregnancy, but only because I was terrified you'd think it was some scheme." She stepped forward, hands raised in a pleading gesture. "Zachary, you know we shared one night of—" Malvina's harsh laugh silenced her. "Ah, so it did happen. But who's to say you weren't sleeping with other men? The timing is all too perfect, don't you think?" Zachary turned away, his breath ragged. Diana's heart pounded as she sensed him wrestling with the enormity of it all. Then, through the half-open door, Grandma's voice called out in concern, "What is all this commotion?" Seconds later, the formidable matriarch appeared, flanked by a couple of anxious staff. Her sharp gaze swept over the three of them, taking in Malvina's smug posture, Diana's tear-streaked face, and Zachary's shell-shocked expression. "Explain yourselves," Grandma demanded, no trace of warmth in her tone. Malvina wasted no time. "Grandma, we've just learned Diana is pregnant, with triplets apparently. She never told Zachary. And if that isn't suspicious enough, remember how this engagement started in the first place. A contract, wasn't it?" A stunned murmur rippled among the staff who lingered. Grandma's face clouded with disappointment. "Is this true?" she asked, voice low. "The engagement is not real?" Diana felt the last shred of her resolve crumble. She shot Zachary a stricken glance before gathering the courage to speak. "When I met Zachary, I was desperate to save my mother. He offered financial help in exchange for me pretending to be his fiancé. We thought it would be simple." Her throat tightened. "But we never meant to deceive you like this, Grandma." Grandma's lips flattened into a thin line. "I'm the one who has been deceived," she said, scathing eyes darting between them. "Zachary, you have disappointed me more deeply than I can express. You agreed to a ruse, a fabricated engagement to secure your inheritance? You know the shame this could bring on our family name." Zachary flinched. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely, shoulders sagging. "I had no choice. You were pressuring me. You had a choice," Grandma snapped, uncharacteristic pain showing in her features. "You could have trusted your grandmother to understand, but you chose lies and subterfuge. And you," she added, turning on Diana, "you came into this house under false pretenses, using my grandson's vulnerabilities. How dare you?" Diana choked on a sob. "That's not what I meant to do. I needed to save my mother's life. And then things changed. Feelings changed." She glanced at Zachary, but his face was a mask of hurt and anger. "It wasn't about the money anymore," Malvina snorted, rolling her eyes. "Feelings? How convenient. You've certainly managed to get pregnant at exactly the right moment." Zachary spun on Malvina, eyes flashing. "Enough! You've had it out for Diana from the start. Don't pretend you're some innocent observer in all of this." But when he turned back to Diana, the indignation in his gaze softened into something more anguished. I can't believe you didn't tell me sooner." He let the pages fall from his hand, fluttering to the floor. Grandma took a trembling breath, every line of her posture bristling with wounded pride. "I can't allow this to continue without consequences. Zachary, you've broken my trust. If you persist in this farce, if you try to legitimize this fiasco, I will disinherit you." Her gaze held steady, though regret flickered in her eyes. "We built this legacy over generations, and I will not see it destroyed by scandal." A hush fell in the study. Diana's hands shook, tears sliding down her cheeks. She could sense the staff in the hallway watching, helpless. Malvina stood off to the side, arms folded, her triumphant stare affirming that she had finally gotten what she wanted. Zachary bowed his head, swallowing hard. His grandmother's words hit him like a physical blow. "Grandma," he started, voice strained. But Grandma lifted her hand, silencing him. "Don't. I've heard enough." She turned, storming out with as much dignity as she could muster, leaving the room tense and suffocating. Diana could hardly breathe, the swirl of emotions pounding in her chest. Malvina scoffed softly, lips curving in that victorious smirk again. "Well, I believe that settles things, doesn't it?" She gathered the fallen papers, stepped around Diana, and swept out. The staff trailed after her, leaving Zachary and Diana alone under the muted glow of the lamp. Diana started to speak, but her voice wouldn't come. She watched Zachary's fists tighten at his sides, his eyes brimming with pain. "Why didn't you trust me with this?" he finally whispered, forehead creasing. "I could have handled it differently if I'd known." Her chest constricted. "I was afraid," she managed, tears choking her words. "Afraid you'd think I was trapping you, or that this would destroy everything you worked for." A moment of raw silence passed. Then, as if all the energy drained out of him, he shook his head. "It might have," he said numbly. "But now, it's worse." She tried to reach for him, but he stepped back, turning away. The devastation etched into his face shattered her. Unable to bear the regret and guilt any longer, she slipped out of the study. The hallway was dim, and she moved as if in a trance, ignoring the stares of the staff who quickly looked away. Every footstep echoed with finality. Rushing to her room, she flung open the door and sank onto her bed, sobbing into her pillow. She pictured her mother's weary face in the hospital, Zachary's conflicted brown eyes, and the blank ultrasound print in her drawer, symbol of a future unraveling before it even began. There seemed to be no path to redemption. At some point, she realized Grandma's ultimatum meant Zachary could lose everything if he chose to stand by her. She remembered how the old woman's voice trembled with betrayal. Aunt Malvina would make good on her threats. Too many forces conspired to ensure Diana's presence in this house ended in ruin for them both. Drying her tears, she crossed to the closet and pulled out a small suitcase, hands shaking as she tossed in whatever clothes she could find. She refused to let Zachary's life be destroyed on her account. If disappearing was the only way to protect him, then that would be her choice. She stole out of her room, suitcase in hand, carefully making her way to a side exit near the staff kitchen. A faint light glowed under the door, but she slipped by unseen, stepping into the brisk night air with her heart hammering. For a brief second, she glanced back at the grand silhouette of the mansion, every window dark except for a few small lamps flickering inside. The life she'd known here, the hopes she'd nursed, was over. In the silence, her mind echoed with Grandma's harsh words, Aunt Malvina's accusations, and Zachary's final expression of heartbreak. She pulled the small ultrasound envelope from her coat pocket, pressing it to her chest in a final desperate act of comfort. Then, swallowing the sorrow gathering in her throat, she turned away from the mansion's lights. Overhearing Grandma's verdict, Diana ran out of the mansion, deciding to leave, for Zachary's sake, before she destroyed his life. Diana hurried along the dimly lit sidewalk, trying to ignore the chill that seeped through her thin jacket. It was past midnight, and each street lamp cast long shadows as if mirroring the heaviness in her heart. Her small suitcase rattled over cracked concrete, and she winced with every clack of the wheels against the uneven pavement. In her free hand, she clutched the ultrasound envelope, the only tangible reminder that her future now involved 3 tiny lives. She'd slipped away from Zachary's mansion to protect him from losing everything, yet the final image of his wounded stare lingered in her mind. The memory weighed on her, making every step feel like a small betrayal. Catching sight of a rundown motel, she glanced at her phone. There were no missed calls, no frantic attempts by Zachary or anyone else to bring her back. Perhaps he was relieved she had left, she thought with a pang. Steeling herself, she booked a cheap room, handing over a few crumpled bills she'd managed to save. The clerk barely lifted his eyes from the faded ledger. Once inside the tiny space, she locked the door, noticing the musty carpet and peeling wallpaper. Exhaustion washed over her, and she collapsed onto the squeaky bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling until her thoughts grew too heavy. At dawn, she was woken by the distant roar of traffic. For a few moments, she forgot where she was, body still aching from the dramatic events of the night before. Then it all crashed down on her. Grandma's disinheritance threat, Aunt Malvina's accusations, Zachary's sorrowful expression. She slid a hand over her lower abdomen, thinking of her mother in the hospital and the babies she carried. With a weary sigh, she rose, changed clothes, and decided she couldn't hide away. The first priority was to check on her mother. Folding the ultrasound envelope carefully into her purse, she took a bus to the hospital. The familiar antiseptic smell and hushed corridors brought her a fleeting sense of security. She found her mother's room in the same wing, the beep of medical machinery a stark reminder of her burdens. Diana paused at the door. Through the small glass window, she saw her mother lying still, eyes shut, while a nurse adjusted an IV bag. Tears stung Diana's eyes. She stepped in quietly. The nurse glanced over, recognizing Diana. "Your mother's stable," she said gently, "but the doctor wants to run additional tests soon." Diana nodded, forcing a polite smile. She perched on the edge of the bed, stroking her mother's hand. The woman's eyes fluttered open, and her gaunt face broke into a weak smile. "Diana," she whispered, "how are you?" Diana swallowed, trying not to let her emotions spill over. "I'm fine, Mom," she lied. "Don't worry about anything. Focus on getting better." Her mother's brow creased with concern, as if she sensed the weight Diana carried, but she lacked the strength to pry. Instead, she murmured something reassuring and closed her eyes, the medication pulling her back toward rest. Diana stayed there for a long time, holding her mother's hand and thinking of all the roads that had led them here. Eventually, she slipped out, heart leaden. On her way down the hospital corridor, a sharp pang in her stomach brought her to a halt. For a split second, panic seized her, wondering if the babies were in distress. The sensation passed, leaving only mild discomfort. She reminded herself she needed proper prenatal care, another expense she could barely afford now. Weary and anxious, she made her way toward the main exit. Outside, the glare of late-morning sun stung her eyes. She found a small bench near the hospital's entrance and sat down, rummaging in her phone's contacts. Her best friend was the only person who knew the truth about the pregnancy. With trembling hands, she made the call. "Diana?" came the immediate, worried voice on the other end. She exhaled. "I left the mansion. Everything fell apart. What happened? Where are you?" "I'm at the hospital, checking on Mom. I'm safe. Don't worry." Her friend's sigh of relief was audible. "Let me come to you. We'll figure something out." They agreed to meet at a small cafe a few blocks away. Diana ended the call, rising to her feet despite her fatigue. She needed to stay in motion, to keep her mind from lingering too long on regret. When she arrived at the cafe, she spotted her friend at a corner table. The moment Diana slid into the chair, her friend grabbed her hands. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, eyes full of concern. Diana offered a weak shrug. "I don't know what to do anymore. Aunt Malvina exposed the pregnancy in front of everyone. Zachary was furious. Grandma disowned him on the spot if he stood by me, so I left to protect him." Her friend's expression was a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "And now? You're on your own, pregnant with triplets. That can't be easy." A tear finally slipped down Diana's cheek. "I feel like every choice I make is the wrong one. If I stay, Zachary loses everything. If I leave, I'm alone with all of this." They spoke for a while, the cafe's background chatter punctuating Diana's tearful recount. The friend insisted she find a better place to stay, somewhere comfortable enough to handle her growing physical needs. But Diana shook her head. "It's too expensive. I have some emergency savings, but it won't last long. And the hospital bills, my mother's and my own care, it's too much." Her friend clucked her tongue. "We'll think of something. For now, just promise me you'll stay healthy. Those babies need you strong." Diana gave a shaky nod. She accepted the few extra bills her friend pressed into her hand, though she hated feeling like a burden. Then, with a final hug, they parted ways. Diana found a slightly cleaner motel on the outskirts of town and used the money to book a room for several nights, hoping for some measure of stability. Meanwhile, across town, Zachary stood at the top of the mansion's grand staircase, staring at the empty corridor that led to Diana's old room. Guilt weighed on him like a physical anchor. He ran a hand through his hair, remembering her tearful face, the tremor in her voice when she tried to explain. He couldn't deny how her absence hollowed the house, or how he still felt a fierce urge to protect her. Yet Grandma had been adamant, continue with Diana, and lose all claim to the family's fortune. The fierce sense of betrayal he'd felt upon learning about her pregnancy still simmered, but a different feeling surfaced too, a pang of worry for her well-being and that of his unborn children. Sighing, he walked downstairs, where Aunt Malvina greeted him with a smug tilt of her chin. "Have you come to your senses?" she asked, sipping tea in the parlor. "We can put this ugliness behind us if you move on from that girl. Grandma might reconsider the inheritance if you demonstrate you're serious about restoring the family name." Zachary's jaw tightened. He remembered the times Diana had shown genuine compassion, the vulnerability in her eyes when she spoke of her mother, the warmth he'd felt lying awake beside her. "I haven't decided anything," he said curtly, turning on his heel. He found Grandma in her private sitting room, by a window filled with potted orchids. She looked older than he remembered, lines of sorrow etched around her mouth. Seeing him, she stood stiffly. "Zachary, if you've come to beg forgiveness, it might be too late." He breathed in, gathering courage. "Grandma, I never meant to hurt you. But Diana's pregnancy is real. If those babies are mine, I can't just abandon her." Her eyes hardened, though regret flickered in them. "You should have thought of that before orchestrating a sham engagement. I cannot abide such deceit. Our family name is already tarnished by your father's past mistakes. I won't let you repeat them." Zachary swallowed his frustration. "That's not fair to Diana. Or to me. Yes, we started with a contract, but things changed. She isn't the monster Aunt Malvina makes her out to be." Grandma's stern posture didn't waver. "Do what you believe is right, but don't expect your inheritance if you defy me." With that, she turned, signaling their conversation was over. Torn between loyalty to his grandmother and concern for Diana, Zachary spent the next few days in a restless fog. He couldn't focus on business matters, snapping at his assistant over small details. At night, he paced the halls, imagining Diana alone somewhere, carrying triplets, her mother still in the hospital. Eventually, he couldn't stand it anymore. Under the cloak of evening, he sat in the study, phone pressed to his ear. He'd hired a private investigator to confirm Diana's pregnancy details, though part of him already knew the truth. The investigator's report was straightforward. Diana wasn't hiding multiple partners or any grand scheme. The babies were in all likelihood his, given the timeline. Relief and a fierce protectiveness welled up in him. Setting the phone down, he made up his mind. Fortune or not, he couldn't abandon the mother of his children. Anger at Aunt Malvina's manipulations burned in his chest, but he pushed it aside. There would be a time to address her lies. Right now, his priority was to find Diana and make things right. Late that night, he closed the mansion's massive front door behind him, ignoring the curious stares of a few staff members lingering in the foyer. The driver waited by a sleek black sedan, engine purring softly. Zachary slid into the back seat, gripping his phone like a lifeline. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked, adjusting his cap. Zachary's face was set with determination, eyes dark with resolve. "Take me to Diana's place. I've got a family to save." Zachary stood on the uneven concrete landing outside Diana's motel room, the yellow glow from an old lamp flickering against chipped paint. He took a moment to steady himself, heart pounding. Earlier that night, he had made the decision to track her down, to cast aside the inheritance if it meant doing the right thing. Now here he was, face to face with the woman who carried his 3 unborn children and who had fled to spare him from ruin. He knocked softly, and when Diana cracked the door open, shock flitted across her features. She clutched it as though torn between slamming it shut or pulling him inside. "Zachary," she whispered, voice trembling. "Why are you here?" He studied her pale cheeks, the tired lines beneath her eyes. Remorse lanced through him for every doubt he'd harbored. "I'm here," he said, swallowing hard, "because I'm not letting you face this alone." Her breath caught, tears brimming. She hesitated, then stepped back to let him in. The motel room was cramped, the walls scuffed and the air stale, but his focus remained on her. He reached out cautiously, resting a hand on her arm, and the familiarity of her warmth calmed them both. She set aside her worry about money, about Grandma's inheritance, about Aunt Malvina's schemes. "I didn't want to ruin your life," Diana breathed. "I thought leaving was the only way to protect you from losing everything you've built." Zachary gently shook his head, his tone soft yet firm. "I don't care about the money right now. I care about you, and about those babies." He swallowed, noticing how she cradled her stomach protectively. "I should have stood by you sooner. I'm sorry." That simple apology broke something inside her. With a quiet sob, she let him pull her into his arms. For a long moment, they clung to each other in the dingy little room, letting the rawness of their shared fears spill over in tears and whispered reassurances. A ringing phone broke through the hush. Diana pulled away, wiping her cheeks, and saw the caller ID, Grandma. Heart hammering, she stared at Zachary. "Answer it," he said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She tapped the screen, uncertain what to expect. Grandma's voice was calmer than Diana remembered, though it carried a hint of sorrow. "Diana, I know you're with Zachary. My grandson has always been stubborn, but it appears he's more serious about you than I realized." She sighed heavily. "We need to talk, both of you." They agreed to meet the next morning. After the call ended, Zachary eased onto the bed beside her, lacing his fingers through hers. "We'll face her together," he promised. That night, they slept, fitfully, but side by side. In the morning, they packed Diana's few belongings into Zachary's waiting car. The day dawned crisp and bright, rays of sunlight slanting through clouds as they pulled up to a small diner where Grandma had arranged to meet them. She waited in a corner booth, posture dignified as always. Tension knotted Diana's stomach. Grandma looked genuinely shaken when they approached. For a moment, she simply regarded Diana's face, then Zachary's. "I've been thinking about this mess," she said quietly, hands folded on the table. "Aunt Malvina's meddling, my own harsh demands, and now the pregnancy." She paused, letting the gravity of it sink in. "Zachary, I know I threatened to disinherit you, but I also realize that if those children are truly yours, I can't turn my back on my own flesh and blood." Zachary exhaled. "Grandma, I'm sorry for everything, the contract, the deception, but I refuse to abandon Diana or my babies." Grandma's brow pinched. "I'm not asking you to. I only wish you'd come to me openly at the start." Her gaze shifted to Diana. "Can you forgive my stubbornness? I want to meet you halfway. Prove that you love my grandson and aren't just here for an easy payday." Diana's eyes brimmed with tears. She nodded, voice tight. "I will. I never wanted to lie. I only did what I thought necessary to save my mother." In that moment, Grandma reached out, placing her palm over Diana's. The older woman's expression softened, a flicker of acceptance in her gaze. But their reunion didn't go unnoticed. From across the diner, Aunt Malvina hovered near the entrance. She strode forward, face set in a pinched frown. "Really, Grandma?" she scoffed. "Now you're just going to forgive this girl because she's carrying triplets? After all the disgrace she's brought us?" Grandma's mouth set in a firm line. "You've done enough harm, Malvina. I may have erred in my judgment, but you crossed a line by digging into Diana's private medical records." Malvina reddened, eyes darting to Zachary. "I did what I had to do to protect this family." "You did what you had to do to protect your own interests," Zachary said, voice frosty. "You wanted me out of the inheritance so you could claim more for yourself or your allies in the family." Under Grandma's sharp gaze, Malvina wilted, grasping for a retort. But Grandma waved her off dismissively. "Enough, Malvina. Your intentions were clear, and you went too far." Tension crackled until Malvina finally turned on her heel and marched out, leaving the three of them to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Grandma squeezed Diana's hand again. "If you'll allow it, I'd like to be part of your journey. My demands will be different this time. No more forced engagements or deadlines. Only honesty." Diana smiled tremulously, warmth spreading through her chest. Zachary's arm slipped around her shoulders, and Grandma gave a small, approving nod. The day continued in a blur, each hour bringing small miracles. They rushed to the hospital when they heard that Diana's mother had a sudden complication. Zachary was at Diana's side the entire time, signing papers without hesitation to ensure the best care possible. Together they kept vigil in the waiting room, neither leaving the other's side. Grandma arrived soon after, silent but supportive, offering a steady presence in the sterile corridors. At last, a doctor emerged with a gentle smile. Diana's mother had stabilized. "She's responding to the latest treatment," he said. "A few more weeks, and she might be strong enough to go home." Emotion surged through Diana, and she buried her face in Zachary's shoulder. Relief, gratitude, and the weight of their hardships melted into that one tender moment. When she looked up, Grandma hovered close by, tears glinting in her eyes. A few days later, with Aunt Malvina keeping her distance, Grandma extended an unexpected invitation, a small celebration aboard the family's yacht to mark new beginnings. Diana hesitated. She wasn't used to such lavish gestures, and part of her felt undeserving. But Zachary and Grandma insisted. On a clear, golden afternoon, they gathered on the sprawling deck, the wind ruffling Diana's hair and the ocean reflecting the sun in sparkling facets. Zachary guided her gently through a canopy of white balloons and delicate flowers, placed by Grandma's orders. Her best friend stood near the bow, beaming and wiping away happy tears. Even a handful of staff from the mansion joined, clapping in excitement for this unlikely union. Under that open sky, Grandma raised a glass of sparkling juice, out of respect for the mother-to-be, and cleared her throat, a smile playing on her lips. "I've thought long and hard about what's happened in our family. We all made mistakes, but we also found something priceless." She turned to Diana. "My dear, you thought you'd fool me, but in the end, I'm the one who got 3 grandbabies as a gift." A collective laugh rippled across the group. Diana's cheeks warmed with happy embarrassment, tears slipping down her cheeks. Zachary gently squeezed her hand, his own eyes bright with emotion. Laughing, he turned to those gathered. "We planned a fake wedding," he said, placing a tender hand atop Diana's growing bump, "and ended up finding what matters most, a true family." And with that, he leaned in to kiss Diana, the ocean breeze tangling in their hair, the waves rocking the yacht as friends and family looked on in joyful applause. While celebrating on the luxurious yacht, Grandma lifts a glass and says to Diana, "You thought you'd fool me, but in the end, I'm the one who got 3 grandbabies as a gift." Diana smiles, emotional, and Zachary jokes, "We planned a fake wedding and ended up finding what matters most, a true family." If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.